The grand chandelier sparkled above as Sophia Reynolds walked through her mansion, her heels clicking against the cold marble floor. Her bedroom was filled with the finest silks, diamond-studded jewelry, and designer dresses worth more than most people's yearly salary. Yet, as she looked around, all she saw was emptiness. She moved to the massive window overlooking the city skyline, lights glittering like stars. Down below, she saw people walking hand in hand, laughing, their faces filled with genuine happiness. She watched a young couple stop under a street lamp, their eyes locked in love before sharing a kiss. Sophia felt a sharp pain in her chest. She touched the glass, her fingers leaving faint prints on the flawless surface. "They have nothing, but everything," she whispered. She turned away, her reflection catching her eye in the mirror. The woman staring back at her was flawless, elegant, beautiful, and utterly alone. Her phone buzzed. Another invitation to another glamorous party. Another night of fake smiles, shallow compliments, and meaningless conversations. Her inbox was filled with messages from men praising her beauty and wealth, but none of them even knew who she truly was. Sophia sighed, scrolling through her social media feed. Perfectly curated photos, all smiles and designer clothes. But then, she stopped at a photo of a young couple. They were sitting on the grass, messy hair, worn-out clothes, laughing as if the world around them didn't exist. It was imperfect. It was real. And it was everything she wanted. Her eyes welled up with tears as she whispered, "Would anyone ever love me, just for me?" The loneliness she felt was suffocating. She had everything anyone could ever dream of: wealth, fame, beauty, yet her heart was empty. Sophia clenched her fists, her diamond bracelet digging into her skin. She was tired of the lies, the fake friends, the men who only saw her as a prize to be won. She longed for someone who would look past the money, the fame, the facade, and see her. That night, as she lay in her luxurious bed, she made a decision. If she wanted to find real love, she had to leave this life behind, even if just for a little while. She would become someone else. Someone ordinary. Someone who didn't have private jets, million-dollar dresses, or a last name that opened every door. She would find out if anyone could love her for who she truly was, without the money, without the fame. As the city lights twinkled outside her window, Sophia's eyes burned with determination. She knew what she had to do. She was going to become someone else, someone real. The sun was just beginning to rise as Sophia Reynolds stood outside Gracie's diner, staring at the flickering neon sign. She took a deep breath, feeling the cold morning air bite at her cheeks. For the first time in her life, she was truly invisible. Dressed in worn-out jeans, a faded hoodie, and scuffed sneakers, she was unrecognizable. No designer labels, no expensive jewelry, just an ordinary girl looking for a job. The name Sophie Baker was scribbled on the application form in her hand. As she stepped inside, the scent of coffee and bacon greeted her. The chatter of early morning customers blended with the clinking of plates and the hum of the old jukebox. It was so different from the marble halls and grand chandeliers of her mansion. Nancy, the diner's owner, looked up from behind the counter. Her sharp eyes scanned Sophie from head to toe. "You the new girl?" she asked, her voice rough but not unkind. Sophie nodded, her heart pounding. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Sophie Baker." The name still felt foreign on her tongue, like a borrowed identity she wasn't sure fit her. Nancy handed her a faded apron. "No need for formalities, kid. Just call me Nancy." She pointed to a row of tables filled with customers. "You're on those. Coffee's always topped up. Smile and keep moving. Got it?" Yes. Nancy, Sophie stammered, tying the apron around her waist. It felt strange and awkward, so different from the glamorous gowns she was used to. As she approached her first table, her heart raced. A middle-aged man was hunched over his newspaper, his coffee cup nearly empty. "Good morning, sir. Would you like a refill?" she asked, forcing a smile. He grunted without looking up. "Yeah, sure." Sophie grabbed the coffee pot, her hands trembling. She leaned over to pour, but her inexperience showed. The cup tipped, hot coffee spilling across the table and onto the man's lap. He shot up, cursing, "What the hell?" His newspaper was soaked, his jeans stained with coffee. Sophie's face went pale. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." She grabbed a handful of napkins, desperately trying to clean up the mess. Nancy appeared at her side, her eyes blazing. "Sophie, what did I tell you about screw-ups?" "I'm sorry." "It was an accident." Sophie's voice trembled, tears prickling at her eyes. Nancy sighed, her shoulders relaxing just a little. "First day, huh? Get it together, kid. Or you won't last till lunch." She handed Sophie a towel. "Now go clean up table 5. And be careful this time." Sophie nodded, her face burning with humiliation. As she walked away, she heard someone chuckling. She looked up and saw him. Messy brown hair, a charming smile, and eyes that sparkled with amusement. Liam Carter. He was sitting at the corner booth, his work boots resting on the edge of his chair. He watched her with a grin, clearly entertained by her disastrous performance. "You might want to work on your pouring skills," he teased, his voice warm and playful. Sophie's cheeks flushed. I'll keep that in mind." Liam's eyes softened. "Hey, don't worry about it. We all have bad days." "First day on the job?" She hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, something like that." She couldn't exactly tell him the truth, that she'd never had a job before. That she was a billionaire heiress pretending to be poor. "Well, Sophie, if you survive Nancy, you'll do just fine," Liam said with a wink. For a moment, Sophie forgot who she was supposed to be. She felt a flutter in her chest, a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. As she moved to the next table, she glanced back, catching Liam watching her. Their eyes met, and he smiled, a genuine, heart-stopping smile. She quickly looked away, her heart pounding. This was dangerous. She couldn't afford to get distracted. She was here for a reason, to find out if someone could love her for who she truly was. But Liam's smile lingered in her mind, his playful eyes haunting her thoughts. This was supposed to be an act, a lie. So why did it feel so real? Sophie took a deep breath, tightening her grip on the coffee pot. She had to keep her guard up. She couldn't let herself fall for him. Because if Liam ever found out who she really was, he'd never forgive her. Sophie didn't know when it started. Maybe it was the way Liam's eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed, or the way his voice softened whenever he asked how her day was going. Or maybe it was the way he treated everyone with kindness, even when the world didn't seem to return the favor. Working at Gracie's diner was still a challenge. Her body ached from long shifts, and her hands were rough from scrubbing tables. But every time the bell above the door jingled and Liam walked in, her heart lifted. He always sat in the same booth, the one by the window where the sunlight danced across his messy brown hair. Every morning, he ordered the same thing: black coffee, pancakes with extra syrup, and a side of bacon. And every morning, Sophie found herself looking forward to his easy smile and the way he always called her name. "Hey, Sophie. His voice was like warm honey, and her stomach fluttered every time. She tried to play it cool, scribbling down his order with practiced nonchalance. But her cheeks always flushed, and her hands trembled just a little. One morning, as she poured his coffee, he looked up at her, his eyes warm and curious. "You always work this hard?" She laughed nervously, setting the pot down before she spilled anything. "Yeah, I guess so. Gotta pay the bills somehow." It wasn't exactly a lie. She just didn't mention that her bills were usually paid by a trust fund bigger than most people's life savings. Liam studied her, his eyes lingering a moment longer than usual. "You're different," he said, his voice soft. "Most people would be miserable doing this job. But you look like you're trying to figure it out." Her heart skipped a beat, panic rising in her chest. Was she that transparent? But Liam's smile was gentle, his eyes kind. It wasn't suspicion. It was curiosity. "I like figuring things out," she replied, choosing her words carefully. It was true. She was figuring out a world she never knew existed, a world where people worked hard, loved deeply, and smiled even when they were tired. She was figuring out Liam. A boy who was nothing like the men she used to know. A boy who wore his heart on his sleeve, who laughed easily and looked at her like she was someone worth knowing. And the more she figured him out, the more she realized she was falling for him. One afternoon, Sophie found herself standing outside Liam's garage, nervously fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. He had invited her to stop by sometime, and she had laughed it off, pretending she was too busy. But the truth was, she was scared. Scared of getting too close. Scared of how he made her feel. Scared of what would happen if he found out who she really was. Before she could change her mind, Liam's voice called out. "Sophie? What are you doing here?" She looked up, her heart doing a somersault as she saw him leaning against the garage door, his arms crossed and a teasing smile on his face. He was covered in grease, his hair messier than usual, but she thought he looked perfect. "I was just in the neighborhood," she lied, her voice a little too high. Liam's eyes sparkled. "Right. And the neighborhood just happened to lead you to my garage?" She laughed, nervously tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Maybe." Liam grinned, wiping his hands on a rag. "Well, since you're here, want to help out?" Her eyes widened. "Me? Help? I don't know anything about cars." "Then it's a good thing you have me," he said, his smile warm and inviting. He handed her a wrench, his fingers brushing against hers. "Come on. It'll be fun." Sophie hesitated, her heart pounding. But the way he looked at her, his eyes full of encouragement, she couldn't say no. He showed her how to change the oil, laughing as she got grease on her nose. She stuck her tongue out at him, playfully swatting his arm, and he laughed, the sound rich and genuine. They worked side by side, their shoulders brushing, their laughter echoing through the garage. Sophie found herself lost in the moment, forgetting about the lie, forgetting about who she was supposed to be. She was just Sophie Baker, a clumsy waitress learning how to fix a car with a boy who made her feel alive. As the sun began to set, they sat on the hood of his truck, their legs dangling off the edge. The air was cool, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold. Liam leaned back, his hands behind his head, his eyes on the horizon. "I like this," he said softly. "Just being here. With you." Sophie's heart ached, a lump forming in her throat. She looked down at her hands, still stained with grease, and whispered, "Me too." For a moment, they were silent, the world around them fading away. Then Liam turned to her, his eyes soft and vulnerable. "Can I ask you something?" She looked up, her breath catching at the look in his eyes. "Yeah, anything." "Why do you hide?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Every time I get close, it's like you're scared of something." Sophie's heart stopped. He was seeing through her. Seeing the truth she was trying so hard to bury. She forced a laugh, looking away. "I'm not hiding. I've never been good at letting people in." Liam's gaze softened. "Well, I hope someday you'll let me in." His words were simple, but they hit her like a punch to the gut. Because she wanted to let him in. She wanted to tell him everything. But she couldn't. Not without losing him. She looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. And before she could stop herself, she whispered, "I'm sorry." Liam frowned, confusion flickering across his face. "For what?" She shook her head, forcing a smile. "For getting grease on your shirt." He laughed, the tension breaking, and playfully nudged her shoulder. But as he laughed, Sophie looked away, the guilt eating her alive. She was falling in love with him. But she was lying to him. And she didn't know how to stop. Sophie's days at Gracie's diner were becoming a routine, but her heart never quite settled. Every morning, Liam walked in with that same smile, his hair a mess, his clothes smeared with grease from working in his garage. He'd sit in his usual booth by the window, tapping his fingers on the table, his eyes lighting up when she approached. Sophie tried to keep things casual, tried to keep her heart in check. But every time he looked at her, she felt that familiar flutter, that aching pull she couldn't resist. "You're getting better at this," Liam teased one morning as she poured his coffee without spilling a drop. She laughed, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well, practice makes perfect." "You must have learned fast," he said, his eyes curious. "You're too graceful for this place. Almost like you grew up somewhere different." Her heart skipped. It was just an innocent comment, but it hit too close to the truth. She forced a laugh. "I wish. I'm just clumsy by nature." He watched her for a moment, his eyes thoughtful. "You're a mystery, Sophie Baker." She felt a chill run through her, but she kept her smile in place. Not much to figure out, really. But that wasn't true, and they both knew it. The more time she spent with him, the more she realized how much she was hiding. And the more he got to know her, the more questions he asked. One evening, after her shift, Liam waited for her outside. His truck was parked by the curb, the engine rumbling softly as he leaned against the door, his arms crossed. "Thought you might want a ride home," he said, his voice casual. Sophie hesitated, her heart racing. "You don't have to." "I want to," he replied, his eyes earnest. She got into his truck, her hands resting on her lap as she tried to calm her nerves. Liam drove with one hand on the wheel, his other arm resting on the open window, the night air tousling his hair. They talked about nothing and everything, laughing at his terrible jokes, sharing stories about childhood memories. Sophie was careful, choosing her words to fit the lie she was living. But it was getting harder. She was getting lost in this role she created. As they pulled up to her apartment, Liam didn't turn off the engine. He looked at her, his eyes soft, his face half-shadowed in the dim streetlight. "Sophie, why did you really come here?" Her heart stopped. She looked down, her hands twisting in her lap. "I told you. I needed a fresh start." "From what?" he pressed, his voice gentle but persistent. "What was so bad that you had to leave?" She felt the panic rising, her chest tightening. She couldn't tell him the truth. She couldn't tell him she was a billionaire heiress, running away from a world of luxury and lies. She couldn't tell him that everything he thought he knew about her was a facade. She forced a smile, looking out the window. I just needed a change. That's all. Liam was silent for a moment, his eyes searching her face. You're a terrible liar, Sophie. Her heart plummeted. She turned to him, forcing a laugh. I'm not lying. You are. And you know you don't have to. Not with me. His voice was so soft, so genuine, it made her chest ache. Sophie looked away, her eyes stinging. She wanted to tell him everything. She wanted to tell him who she really was, why she was here, and how much he meant to her. But she couldn't. If she did, she'd lose him. Liam sighed, leaning back in his seat. You don't trust me. I do, she whispered, her voice trembling. Then why won't you let me in? She looked at him, her heart breaking. It's not you, it's me. He shook his head, his smile sad. That's the oldest excuse in the book. She felt tears prickling at her eyes. Liam reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. I wish you'd let me in, Sophie. His voice was so soft, so full of longing, it shattered her. And then he pulled back, his hand falling away, his eyes clouded with hurt. Good night, Sophie. He didn't wait for her to respond. He started the engine, driving away before she could say a word. She stood there, watching his truck disappear into the night, her heart breaking. She wanted to chase after him, to call out his name, to tell him the truth. But she couldn't. She was trapped in this lie, and the walls were closing in. The next day at work, things were different. Liam still came in, still sat in his usual booth, still ordered his usual coffee and pancakes. But his smiles were softer, his words fewer. He didn't look at her the same way. He looked at her like he was trying to figure out who she really was. And that terrified her. Emma noticed too. She watched Liam watch Sophie, her eyes narrowing, her lips curling into a smug smile. She approached Sophie by the coffee machine, her voice low and venomous. Trouble in paradise, she sneered, her eyes gleaming. Sophie forced herself to stay calm. I don't know what you're talking about. Emma laughed, a cold, bitter sound. Oh, please. You think I don't see it? You've got him wrapped around your finger. But it won't last. Sophie's heart raced. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I think you do, Emma whispered, stepping closer. I see the way you look at him. And I see the way you lie to him. Sophie's blood ran cold. Emma's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. I don't know who you are, but I'm going to find out. And when I do, Liam will know the truth. She walked away, her shoulders squared, her head held high. Sophie stood there, frozen, her heart racing. She was losing control. The lie was getting too big, too heavy. And she didn't know how to carry it anymore. Sophie stood frozen behind the counter, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear anything else. She watched in horror as her old friends, Amanda and Tyler, waltzed into Gracie's diner, their designer clothes and expensive cologne clashing starkly with the worn-out booths and chipped tables. She hadn't seen them in months, not since she left her life as Sophia Reynolds behind. But they were here, smiling, laughing, oblivious to the chaos they were about to unleash. Sophia. Amanda's voice rang out, loud and unmistakable. Oh my God, it really is you. Sophie's blood ran cold. She tried to compose herself, forcing a smile. I think you've got the wrong person. Amanda laughed, flicking her perfectly curled hair over her shoulder. Oh, stop it. It's me. Amanda. And look, Tyler's here too. Tyler grinned, his hands stuffed in his designer pockets. What are you doing in a place like this, Soph? Slumming it for a reality show? He laughed, but Sophie felt sick. Wait. Sophia? Liam's voice cut through the noise like a knife. Sophie turned, her heart shattering as she saw him standing by his usual booth, his face pale, his eyes wide with confusion. He looked at her like he didn't recognize her at all. Amanda's eyes sparkled with mischief, clearly enjoying the spectacle. You didn't tell your little friend who you are? That's so cute. Liam took a step forward, his jaw clenched. What's going on? Sophie's chest tightened, tears burning at the back of her eyes. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Her secret, her carefully constructed lie, was crumbling before her eyes. Amanda rolled her eyes, oblivious to Sophie's panic. Liam, right? Oh, honey, Sophia is loaded. Billionaire Heiress. Reynolds Enterprises. Private jets, yachts, the whole 9 yards. The color drained from Liam's face. His eyes locked on Sophie, his voice hollow. Is that true? Sophie opened her mouth, but no words came out. She could see the hurt in his eyes, the betrayal etched deep in his expression. He took another step back, shaking his head. All this time, you lied to me? I didn't mean to, Sophie's voice broke, tears spilling down her cheeks. I just wanted to be normal. I wanted to know if someone could love me for me. Not for my name or my money. Liam's face twisted with anger, his fists clenching. So you lied to me? You played me? Was this some kind of game to you? No. It wasn't like that. I never meant to hurt you. Sophie's voice cracked, her heart shattering as she took a step toward him. Liam recoiled, his eyes cold and distant. I don't even know who you are. Sophie's knees went weak, her vision blurring. She reached out, her hand trembling. Liam, please. I'm still me. I'm still Sophie. He shook his head, his face hardening. No, you're not. Sophie Baker doesn't exist. You made her up. Just like everything else. Sophie's breath caught in her throat, her chest aching. The pain in his voice was unbearable. Liam turned away, his shoulders stiff, his voice cold. Stay away from me, Sophia. He walked out, the bell above the door jingling as it slammed shut behind him. Sophie's world collapsed. She dropped to her knees, her shoulders shaking as sobs tore through her. Amanda and Tyler exchanged awkward glances before slipping out, leaving Sophie alone on the diner floor. Nancy's hand rested gently on her shoulder, her voice soft and sad. You should have told him the truth, kid. Sophie cried harder, her heart shattered into a million pieces. She had wanted to find love, real love. But all she had found was heartbreak. Because she had been living a lie. And now, she had lost everything. The days that followed were a blur. Liam didn't come to the diner anymore. His usual booth by the window sat empty, haunting her every day. Sophie tried calling him, leaving message after message, but he never responded. She even went to his garage, but he refused to see her. Emma watched with smug satisfaction, her eyes gleaming with victory. But even she couldn't make Sophie feel worse than she already did. She had ruined everything. All because she was too afraid to tell the truth. Nancy pulled her aside one evening after closing. You love him, don't you? Sophie looked down, tears filling her eyes. Yeah, I do. Then fight for him, Nancy said, her voice firm. You made a mess. Now clean it up." Sophie wiped her tears, determination hardening her resolve. She couldn't let it end like this. She needed to make things right, even if it meant giving up everything. The next day, she went back to her mansion. The house felt empty, cold, and unwelcoming. Everything she once thought was important now felt meaningless. She packed her designer clothes, her jewelry, and all the remnants of her old life. She called her lawyer, asking him to sell the mansion and donate the money to charity. She walked through the halls one last time, her heart heavy but her mind clear. She didn't want this life anymore. She just wanted Liam. Dressed in her old waitress uniform, she went to his garage. He was under a car, his legs sticking out, his tools clattering. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she called out, "Liam?" He slid out from under the car, his face hardening when he saw her. He stood up, wiping his hands on a rag, his eyes cold. "What do you want?" "I came to tell you the truth," she said, her voice steady. "All of it." Liam crossed his arms, his jaw clenched. "I already know the truth. You lied to me. You made me look like an idiot." Sophie's heart broke, tears welling up. "I never meant to hurt you. I didn't want you to see the money, the name, and not see me." Liam looked away, his shoulders stiff. "Yeah, well, you did a great job hiding who you are. Maybe you're just good at pretending." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I'm not pretending now. I love you, Liam. I love you, and I'm so sorry I lied." His eyes softened, his pain breaking through. "How do I know what's real?" Sophie reached into her pocket, pulling out a crumpled envelope. "I sold the house. I gave away everything. I don't want any of it. I just want you." Liam looked at the envelope, his eyes wide with shock. "You, what?" She took his hand, her fingers trembling. "I can't change what I did. But I can be honest now. I'm just Sophie. No lies. No games. Just me." Liam's face softened, his eyes filling with tears. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, his voice breaking. "I missed you, Sophie. The real you." Sophie sobbed against his chest, her heart finally at peace. She had found love. Real love. Because she finally told the truth. Sophie stood there, wrapped in Liam's arms, her heart finally at peace. For the first time, she wasn't pretending. She wasn't hiding. She was just herself. They stood in his garage, surrounded by tools and old car parts, the air smelling of oil and gasoline. It was so far from the world she grew up in, the world of chandeliers and champagne, but it felt more like home than any mansion ever did. Liam pulled back, his hands resting on her shoulders, his eyes searching hers. "No more lies?" he asked, his voice soft but firm. Sophie shook her head, her eyes shining with tears. "No more lies. I promise." Liam's lips curled into a smile, relief flooding his face. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't care about your money, or your name, or where you came from. I just care about you." Sophie's heart swelled, tears slipping down her cheeks. "That's all I ever wanted." Their lips met, soft and tender, a kiss filled with forgiveness, love, and hope. It was everything she had dreamed of and more. When they pulled apart, Liam's smile was playful, his eyes twinkling. "So, does this mean you're quitting the diner?" Sophie laughed, the sound light and free. "I think I've spilled enough coffee for a lifetime." Liam grinned, pulling her close again. Good. I don't think Nancy's heart could take any more of your disasters. They laughed together, their joy echoing through the garage. Sophie rested her head on his shoulder, her heart full. She had come here searching for something real. And she had found it. Not just in Liam, but in herself. For the first time, she knew who she was. And she knew she was enough. The next day, Sophie went back to Gracie's diner one last time. She found Nancy wiping down the counter, her face softening when she saw her. So, you're leaving, huh? Nancy asked, her voice gruff but gentle. Sophie nodded, her eyes filling with tears. Yeah, it's time for me to figure out who I really am. Nancy looked at her, her eyes warm. You already did, kid. She pulled Sophie into a hug, her voice breaking. I'm proud of you. Sophie held on tight, her heart overflowing with gratitude. She never thought she'd find a family here, in this small diner, in this small town. But she did. She wiped her tears, giving Nancy a teary smile. Thank you for everything. Nancy waved her off, her eyes shining. Go on, get out of here before I start bawling like a baby. They laughed, hugging one last time before Sophie walked out the door, the bell jingling behind her. She stepped out into the sunlight, her heart light, her spirit free. Liam was waiting by his truck, his smile warm and welcoming. He opened the passenger door, his eyes never leaving hers. You ready? He asked, his voice gentle. Sophie took his hand, squeezing it tight. More than ever. They drove away, the town fading into the distance, the sun shining brightly above. Sophie leaned her head against the window, her heart full of hope. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she wasn't alone. She had Liam, she had love, and she had herself. And for the first time, that was enough. Would you have forgiven Sophie for her lies? Can love survive deception, or does honesty always win in the end? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of love, redemption, and second chances, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.